Thanks for joining us for a special segment that we are doing this week, Caring Through COVID, a week of empowerment. We're focusing on your concerns, our community, and also trying to answer some of the questions I know that many of you have. We want to empower you with important information to move through and past this historic time for our region. Now, this is the first of a three-part series this week. Later in the week, we will explore how you can take care of your physical, mental health, and also how this pandemic is impacting our local economy. Today, we are focusing on the lifeline of our region, the oil and gas industry. Now, you don't need us to tell you oil prices have taken a historic drop in the recent weeks. So how did we get here? We're going to simplify it for you. It started when China had their outbreak of the virus. They closed their factories and the demand for oil started to go down from there. And then rather than slow down production, Russia and Saudi Arabia, which happens to be the world's top exporter, launched a price war, flooding the market with cheap oil. So again, that is a very simplified version of what has been going on. And to give more perspective on what is happening, our two leading men in the industry who can offer a lot of perspective on what's going on. I have Tommy Taylor. He's the Director of Oil and Gas Development at Fasken Oil and Ranch. And also Cal McGraw. He's the President of Trinidad Energy, operating wells in the Permian Basin, and also the current chairman of the Permian Basin Petroleum Association. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Tommy, we'll start with you. In your words, how did we get to this point?
Well, I've heard it called by several people, kind of a West Texas term, a double whammy.
Yes.
And you know, the Saudis and the Russians have been, and OPEC, you hear OPEC plus a lot. It's OPEC members plus some other nations that are big exporters have been worried about their market share. And as you know, the United States, we've almost become energy independent. If you look at on the net energy basis, but we're producing as a nation about 13 million barrels of oil a day up until this crisis hit. So it was kind of a twofold thing that built on one another. The COVID-19 has, with all the shutdowns, has dropped the demand for all energy products across the board significantly. Some people think up to 25%. And the world uses about 100 million barrels of oil a day. And we've heard that, they don't know yet. As time moves along, we kind of look back to see what we've used. And a lot of people say we're only using maybe less than 80 million barrels of oil a day. So the market, the producers have keep producing, and so we're overproducing maybe more than 20 million barrels a day. And so where's all that oil going to be stored?
Yeah, that's the question. We're running out of that storage.
We're hearing from our midstream purchasers and transporters that inventories are filling up. And even though, and you see the price of oil's down about $20 a barrel, that's not actually what we're getting. We're getting something less than that because there's these differentials, and depending on where your oil ends up, and as these inventories rise, that differential gets higher. So what's going to happen is when those tanks get to near the top, the differential is going to be where you're getting basically zero for your product. And this is a very unprecedented time for the oil and gas industry. I don't know historically if there's ever been a time quite like this.
And to hear somebody in your position say that is, I know that's for someone like me and other people at home going, what? Kyle, I want to bring you in on this. Part of what makes up West Texas and our economy are, the independent companies. You are one of those people that run that. How is this impacting you in your business?
Well, just like Tommy describes with Fasken Oil and Ranch, they're private independents as well. They're just very large with large land holdings, and I just represent a small producer, but the impact is the same. In restating how we got here, I've counted back. I've been in the business for 37 years, so over 4 decades in working. I've now experienced, this is the 5th bust that I've been a part of that I would say pretty major. You described how cyclical the industry has been. Mm-hmm. And so of those, this particular bust is unprecedented. As you well described it, your simplified method, the fact that we had a coronavirus issue going on that was causing low demand, then you have a price war on top of it. It actually, I believe, it surprised both the Russians and the Saudis how much damage they caused. They didn't realize it would drop oil prices as low as it did. And so here they've had a meeting, to try to make amends for that. And their result, even though they're going to cut almost 10 million barrels a day, 9.7, the market has been unimpressed and oil has continued to drop. And so that's been significant. But as Tommy was saying, the real coming doom, I would say, is the month of May and June. The predictions that our storage capacity will fill up, as y'all were touching on, and the fact that our realized oil price is, as Tommy had described, we don't get. I just looked a minute ago. It's just under $20 a barrel for West Texas Intermediate right now, 1970. But by the time you pull off the differential from Midland to Cushing, Oklahoma, and you pull off the other, we're talking about right now, I would calculate $11 differential. So when you do that, we'll realize $8 a barrel. Well, my goodness, that's unprecedented. Also,
that feels like a punch to the gut.
Oh, exceptional punch to the gut. And so while I was, I don't know anybody that has lifting costs much below $8 a barrel, and so therefore you'll be losing on your just producing it. And so what do? Do you shut it in? Now, we're not thinking it'll stay like that. We all know, we'll get to it later, I bet, talk about, what's the hope for the future? What do we need to solve this? So I don't want to jump ahead too quick, but it's impacting large companies and it's impacting small companies.
So, okay, we got the oil, the OPEC plus, there was an agreement to cut production globally. What could that mean for our oil prices? As you said, they did agree to a cut, but we haven't seen, a big impact on our price. One of the reasons being perhaps the storage, it continues to fill up. We're not moving the demand anywhere. What could that mean for us in the near future? Nothing. I mean, you just said prices are going to continue to drop, likely.
They've continued to drop. However, it still helped. I suspect had they not been able to meet and they broke apart and not come to an agreement, I should say, then I think we would even see worse conditions. So OPEC did something. I wish they could have met and pulled 20 million barrels a day off, but that even the 10 million barrels a day they're talking about pulling is the largest amount pulled off the market ever. And so it's just this demand destruction. As Tommy says, they're talking, some say as much as 25 million barrels a day is not being utilized because no one's flying, no one's driving.
Right.
And so that the fact that they did something, I believe, has helped. It's just it didn't help enough, but it will help over time. If they'll keep that oil off, we won't just keep making matters worse. And it was another fairly unprecedented time was President Trump weighing in so heavily. Mm-hmm. We had been writing letters, many in the industry had, appealing for governmental help, say, help us in the negotiations with Saudi Arabia. And President Trump has done that. And in fact, the deal was so tenuous, Mexico was going to cause the deal to fall apart because they weren't going to they were assigned a 400,000 barrel cut and said, no, we can only do 100. And President Trump basically said, okay, we'll cover their share. We'll figure out how to make it up and probably help keep that deal together with simply that vote of confidence. Whereas maybe we can talk later about how difficult it is for the U.S. to come to agreement on how to cut because we're so independently owned. We're bifurcated with so many companies. We're not a state-owned business, and so therefore it's kind of hard. And that'll kind of, when we talk about the Railroad Commission meeting, we'll kind of lead into that as well.
Okay.
But I will say what Saudi and Russia did it did help us. It would be worse had they not done that. It's just still mighty bad.
Yeah, we need to keep that in mind. Last question for this part of our segment. Where does business stand right now? In the meantime, what are your companies doing to keep the lights on? And I hate to simplify it that much. What work is being done at the moment or can be done?
Tommy, go ahead.
Well, first and foremost, we were concerned about our employees, and so we've all, we are classified as an essential business in Texas. Mm-hmm. But we're going to cut costs where we can. We're going to try to do things as cheaply and as efficiently as we can. But first and foremost, we're going to keep our employees safe. But we're just hoping once this virus clears out, we can all come back to work and and just see what we can do.
Certainly.
But it's going to take a long period of time to work through this, and hopefully Dr. Perryman can give us some indications of how he thinks the economy is going to respond once these restrictions are lifted. Because I know when you talk about these economics, and there's lots of modeling, but sometimes it doesn't always work out like you think it's going to. Kind of the principles are always the same, the supply and the demand, but we're hopeful that people will, after being recovering from their cabin fever, will want to get out and travel around and get back on an airplane and get our economy going again. That's probably the best thing that could happen. And the low oil prices right now are going to provide a very big stimulus to the economy, and the gasoline and fuel prices will be cheap. And I want the viewers to remember one thing: when they go to the gas station, every gallon is taxed by the state and the federal government, and that's almost 50 cents a gallon. So when you see fuel down at, if it gets down to $1 a gallon, the oil and gas companies are only getting about half of that. So keep that in mind, that there's a pretty good tax on fuels.
I didn't know that. I learned something today. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for making time for us. We're going to continue this conversation coming up here in a few minutes. We're going to rope in world-renowned economist Dr. Ray Perryman to offer some of his perspective. So we hope that you'll stay with us. Now, coming up, we have been asking you to send the love. We've got to lighten things up a bit for just a second, telling us we want to know how you are making your days a little brighter. Kobe Joe sent us this photo of gardening, and which no ways can be confused with playing in the mud. Cute. And what about Christmas in April? That's what Ponds are doing. They are doing this to make their neighborhood, give them something nice to look at. We like it. What are you doing to make your days brighter? Text us your photos and videos. Our number is 567-9991. Stick with us. After the break, we'll continue our conversation on the oil industry and where we go from here. Welcome back to our special segment, Caring Through COVID, a week of empowerment. Now, if you are just now joining us, we just finished the first part of our conversation with Tommy Taylor and Kyle McGraw discussing the coronavirus and the impact that it has had on the oil and gas industry. And now we're going to turn our focus to what this could mean for the future. Now, like so many parts of our economy, the oil and gas industry has imploded. The question, why? Well, because as we shelter in place, the demand for energy has plummeted. In early January, Texas oil was trading at around $60 a barrel, but recently we've seen oil under $20. That's how it stands right now. Pioneer Natural Resources, a huge player in the Permian Basin, wants the Texas Railroad Commission to force all Texas producers to cut production by 20%, hoping that less supply will help prop up prices.
We need $30 to survive. $20, you'll have 80% bankruptcies, 250,000 employees laid off. $30 is what I call we're crippled, but at least the industry will survive, waiting until the virus ends and demand picks up by the end of 2021.
And it's not clear, at least for now, that there are enough votes to force a cut in production, but companies like Pioneer say by summer the U.S. will run out of storage space for its excess supply of oil and gas. Now, oil prices, they've moved some a little higher after the OPEC reached a historic agreement last week, and since then they have continued to fluctuate. OPEC members agreed to cut 9.7 million barrels a day. Now that comes right under the initial proposal of 10 million. So what could this mean, this new agreement mean for the Permian Basin? We're going to continue our conversation with Tommy Taylor, the Director of Oil and Gas Development at Fasken Oil and Ranch, and Kyle McGraw, the President of Trinidad Energy Operating Wells in the Permian Basin and the current Chairman of the Permian Basin Petroleum Association. We're also bringing in Dr. Ray Perryman, the President and CEO of the Perryman Group. Dr. Perryman, thank you so much for taking time to join us in this conversation. We'll start with you. We just ran that soundbite with Mr. Sheffield with Pioneer saying that we need the $30 price of oil. What's your perspective on that and its impact it could have on our economy?
Well, the situation we're seeing right now, Tatum, as you mentioned, the prices or the production was cut 9.7 million barrels a day starting in May with OPEC. They may do a few shenanigans between now and then. The market itself, with the reduction, because as you know, fracked wells, there's a lot of production when they come online and then it drops off fairly quickly. So as we start putting fewer of those wells online, our production numbers will start to drop. We think that, with the shale producing areas around the world, will probably drop another 3 or 4 million barrels a day off. So in effect, we're cutting about 13, 14 million barrels a day out of demand or out of supply, but demand has fallen by over 20 million barrels a day. So we're still have this mix of every day there's more being produced than being consumed. And as Scott pointed out, we're running out of storage. We're running out of a place to put it. And so that whole thing has to get addressed. Now, the good news, I think, to the extent there is good news in this, is obviously the world economy just shut down. I mean, when you see demand drop 20% in 10 days, that can't happen unless you just literally shut the world down. And it's still continuing to fall. Once we start opening up the economy and people start consuming again and producing things again and that sort of thing, I think we'll see the demand come back pretty quickly, not to where it was before, but because of these production cuts, because of the OPEC agreement, it doesn't have to come back, but about half of that to get us back to where we can have an orderly market, get prices up into the mid 30s or even potentially 40, which is enough that, again, some production in the Permian Basin starts to be economically feasible at that point, particularly down in the southern Delaware Basin. So it's one of those things that we have to work through right now. In a column I wrote this week, I called what OPEC did a necessary but not sufficient condition. It helps the situation, but it's not going to completely solve the problem.
Right. It's not an immediate solution. Taking a look at our area, we've already seen an impact. Companies have done layoffs. I spoke to one person on the phone saying, he worked for a company that had about 70 frac crews. In about 2 days, they went down to 2. Do you anticipate to see more of that happening in our economy and the impact in the coming months until we see that demand start to return?
Well, of course. I mean, we're the epicenter of the new oil and gas production, the hydraulic fracturing production that's taking place in this country. Of all the production that's taken place, the new production in the last 5 or 6 years, 2/3 of it's come out here. I mean, we are the center of all of this. So certainly we're going to see some effects from that. We also have some of the lowest cost production. So I think we could be one of the first ones to come back as prices start to rise. But it's a very difficult situation for the industry right now, coupled with the fact that for a variety of reasons, the virus being one, but also just some things that happened before that, capital's not available to these companies in the same way it was, say, 5 or 6 years ago. And that's also hampering the ability to move quickly and deal with some of these things in the way we'd like to in terms of being able to keep production in place. You're going to see continuing, because drilling costs are falling. You're seeing some wells being drilled, but they're not being fracked. They're not being brought into production. And it's going to be a while before that starts to happen again.
Right. But Tommy and Kyle, let's bring you into this part of the conversation. This is something that y'all are working with every day, making decisions right now. What kind of conversations are you having, in the immediate outlook, for the future for your companies?
Yeah. Well, I'll take it first, Kyle. We're still running 2 drilling rigs, but they're going to be finishing up the projects they're on, and we'll be laying them down, and we probably won't drill again until we see the price of oil recover, to somewhere in the $30 or $40 range. But certainly you cannot drill anything economically right now. And I think you're going to, the rig count kind of lags just a little bit, the oil price, and I think you'll see it's started to fall, and I think you'll see it fall some more. And then, and like Dr. Perryman said, hopefully when this thing lifts, we can all go back to work and the consumption will come back up, and slowly this thing will kind of unwind, and we can go back to work and recover from the damage that we're seeing right now.
Right. Kyle, what about you?
So, you had said, what conversations are we having to try to manage your business now? We're making calls to vendors that provide services for us and asking them to make reductions. They're very sympathetic. I was on a call with someone who has trucks and equipment that charge about $125 an hour normally, and he's willing to work with me at $80 an hour for that same service. And I've told him, I said, listen, I know you're helping me through this time. If we can get back into the 50s, we'll remember this, so you can slide your prices back up. But it's now we're all having to share this shortage, if you will. And I was in a recent conversation just a few minutes ago with a pressure pumper. Those are probably some of our most seriously hit industries, the fracking industry, those that actually pump the frack jobs. And he was telling me that one of his idle crews that's not pumping now, when it's idle, it cost him $500,000 a month. So he's a president of a pressure pumping company. So he's having to make decisions to lay those people off. And so you let those people go, and then our oil price slightly recovers in a few months, and then how hard is it to get them to come back? And it's such a painful cyclical industry. And we've all been a part of cycles, as we mentioned earlier, but this one has been so extreme, so severe,
and so fast, it seems.
Exactly. No, from the first part of March, everything was okay, and within 2 weeks, everything had just fallen apart on us, and now it's just continued to go further. I spent a few weeks feeling okay at $30 a barrel. Now I realize, 30 is not what it's going to be. Now here we are at 1977, and as we talked earlier, when you would deduct all the differentials we deal with, our realized price is at an unsustainable level, of course. So then you have the challenge of deciding what wells can we shut in and what damage do we cause by shutting it in. You can cause mechanical damage in that well bore, or you can cause reservoir damage in some cases. For the most part, not a lot of reservoir damage, but you can have corrosion issues with idle equipment. And so we're having to make decisions about, okay, what do we do when the capacity fills? So we're asking ourselves questions that I sure would have never thought I'd be asking 60 days ago.
My goodness. Well, I would like to get y'all's perspective on the Texas Railroad Commission. They had their hearing, brought a lot of stakeholders to the table to talk about, where how do we move forward? And a big part of the conversation is cutting production. What is your perspectives on that? I'll let whoever has some perspective to offer jump in first.
I'm happy to start. I'm not a big fan of artificially forcing production cuts. The market's doing this. I mean, Tommy and Kyle were just talking about the things they're doing right now. Those are going to bring production cuts. OPEC is kind of a different animal because they chose not to function as individual countries fluctuating in the market, but to try to work as a group. And so they have to come together and reach agreements and that sort of thing. We are in a market economy right now. We're going to see production follow the United States, whether we have any regulation or not, because the prices are compelling it to happen. I'd prefer to see us do it that way as opposed to these forced production cuts. That's not an easy thing to achieve technically. I mean, Kyle was just talking about some of the challenges you face when you start shutting in wells and things like that. It's not easy to achieve technically, and I don't think it's necessary because, again, the folks are not going to be bringing the new wells online, and given the nature of these wells in the shale formations, that's going to take care of dropping production in and of itself. We don't need a regulation to do that. So I'd prefer to let the market take care of it. We haven't had regulation of production in Texas since the early 80s. And that was a very different time because not only did we have an oil bust, but we were running out of oil in the state at that point in time. We had a very rapid decline in what we thought our reserves were. With the new technologies of the past few years, that's completely changed. We now have centuries of supply. It's just a matter of when is the appropriate time to bring it on the market. And I think the market itself can help us make that decision.
Tommy or Kyle, what do you think? What do you think would be a viable option forward?
I would jump in on the comment about the Railroad Commission and their role. We do know they did supply a governing body from the 1930s to the 1970s. They did have market demand hearings and would determine through proration how much you could produce. You could achieve a top allowable for a well, or they would limit your amount of production. And that was in order to regulate and stabilize oil prices. And then, but in the 1960s, when OPEC was formed and they put together their own coalition, as Dr. Perryman indicated, they put it together to help stabilize oil prices. That's their mandate, is to try to stabilize oil prices for the world. And at that time, the U.S. was an insignificant producer in the 1970s. We've since grown to be the #1 producer in the world. So I would actually contend, how can we expect the Saudis and OPEC to control world oil prices and we hide out and not be a part of the conversation? Shouldn't we be a part of the conversation? And yet Dr. Perryman's right. We're not a state-run business. Our government cannot tell us. And so now who can do it? Actually, probably the only one of the few bodies in the whole country would be the Railroad Commission, could do it if they chose mechanically. Now they have to figure out how to do it now compared to 40 years ago. But as we mentioned earlier, I think Tommy Taylor mentioned it, that Railroad Commission hearing was so interesting and so important. 30,000 viewers worldwide watched. So I'm telling you, the conversations are important. And and while we all in Texas and in America love to think about we're free market thinkers, we want the free market economy. We have not had a free market in oil and gas prices in my entire career. The Saudi Arabians, with their control through OPEC, have set the price of oil. We are price receivers, not price makers. And so, in that regard, should we enter a new world order? Should we try something different now?
Would now be
would
the
like
time
to say,
to do that? You know,
as an independent, I'd say yes. But however, as the chairman of the Permian Basin Petroleum Association, we represent 700 member companies. And I'm telling you what, it's split down the middle. There's really good people on both sides of the issue that can give great, compelling arguments for why we should and why we shouldn't. And so I don't know. It's going to be a very hard thing, but I appreciate the commission being willing to explore it and investigate it and think about what could we do to help. Yeah. I'd love to see for the next 30 years. I know they can do nothing really that will help this current problem. It's a pandemic. We need it out of the way and get a normal economy. But I believe we should be a part of some kind of conversation that helps try to make oil and gas more predictable. As it is right now, it is so volatile. How can you expect the investment community to risk dollars in this industry anymore? I mean, it's just so volatile.
Sure. And after this,
I would certainly agree that we need to have the conversation, and what the commission's doing is very important right now, and that we need to be at the table, because we have grown into one of the major producers in the world, quite often these days the largest producer in a number of months, and we need to be a part of the conversation. I think there's no question about that. I don't think a restriction on Texas production right now, if you look at how much we could reasonably reduce it and what that would mean in the world market right now, that's not, it's incremental. It's not going to get us very far in terms of trying to control the price. But I do think as we go forward, when they sit at the table and determine oil prices, and OPEC's there and Russia's there and Mexico's there, we need to be there. I mean, we need to be at the table talking about this, because we are a big part of the market going forward, and it is a very different situation than it was before. I'm concerned both structurally, technically, and from a standpoint of how we achieve this and what impact we could potentially have right now. Whether we should be trying to regulate production right now, because again, the nature of the Saudis and Russians still have fields that are not fracked fields. It's a whole lot easier to manage production. That's what the Railroad Commission did all those years, was manage production with traditional drilling. It's much harder to do that with these fracked wells because of just their very nature. A lot of it when you first come online, then a very rapid decline curve, and so the market is going to make these adjustments for us. And I'm not sure, even technically, in terms of just the geophysics required, I'm not sure exactly how we would go about doing that. It's certainly not the kind of thing I think we can make that decision in the middle of what we're dealing with right now, and expect it to have any impact in the next couple of months on the price.
No, well, I certainly agree.
Again, yeah. I agree with a lot of what Kyle said, but I'm not sure regulation in Texas right now is going to help us get through this problem. And I think we will get back to an orderly market. But I think we're naive to think that all the other people that are producing in the neighborhood of 10 million barrels a day can say that can get together and come to an agreement, and we can just stand off on the sidelines and act like we're not a part of it. I mean, those days are gone. We're too big for that now.
Yeah.
Now, in conversations with Scott Sheffield, he has pointed out one of the things is he doesn't propose Texas be alone. The thought is Texas could influence others, and so that's kind of the dream for longer term. Is could we lead the way? Then all of a sudden you have a North American coalition with all the producing states in the U.S. and then maybe even Canada joins that as well. And would Mexico be in? They're kind of a part of OPEC. But you're right, that isn't going to happen anytime soon. It's got a lot of logistical challenges. But I wonder if it's not time to think that way for the future. But again, in this pandemic, we just need our country to get healthy. We need people back to driving and running our country. We need our whole world to get healthy and get back to driving.
Right. Let's get healthy. Let's get things moving again. We could talk about this certainly all day. But we're running short on time. Each of you, I'll give you last word here. Give us something good. Tell me something good. What is a bright spot in all of this? I know that's certainly hard to see maybe right in the moment, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak.
Well, I'll start off, Tatum, and I appreciate you doing this program for us. But You know, some of the bright things we've seen is, you know, we're all in this together, and Americans are very unique place to live, and I wouldn't want to go through this in any other place than right here in Midland, Texas. And we do care about our fellow man and our neighbors. Our company tried to. We saw a need for with one of our providers called True Chemical, saw a need for hand sanitizer.
Yes, yes.
And you know that isopropyl alcohol is made out of the primary ingredients natural gas liquid, so it's a fossil fuel. And we had about 2,000 gallons made up, and we sent it around to the local hospitals and nursing homes and Meals on Wheels and things like that. But I think you'll see a lot of kind acts by you know, the oil and gas industry. You know, during the Hurricane Harvey and all the outreach that they did. This is a much different time now that we don't have the cash flow that we did, but we're very concerned about our neighbors and everybody in Texas, and we'll get through it together.
Certainly, certainly.
I'll jump in. We can leave Ray for the grand finale. I would say too, as Tommy did, I think the good nature of Americans in West Texas too, to try to look out for one another. I know things going on at the food bank, they're running short of supplies, and what we can do to help our brethren and our employees. Hold on to your employees as long as you can. I really appreciate our administration, our government, for trying to help the ability to pass those stimulus packages as fast as they did, to try to get it in people's hands. And some of the media will talk about how the mistakes that are being made, but can you imagine doling out $250 billion in a week? Yeah, you're going to make a few mistakes, but they're trying hard to get it in people's hands, and they're willing to write checks for more. And I don't know what long-term impact that has on our country with that much debt, but still, right now, it's important to get that in people's hands. I'm thankful for that. And as an employer with a small number of employees, I'm going to try to work as hard as I can to hold on, because this is a temporary event. We will get back to normal.
Yes.
And so we need to just stay the course, hang on, try to lose money for a little while in order to survive, to live for a better day. And so I'll be quiet.
Yeah, I can add a couple of things on notes of optimism here. First of all, this is an economic crisis caused by a health crisis. And as we fix the health crisis, the economy and the private sector can get involved and engaged again. All this ingenuity and creativity that America does so well will come back to the fore, and we can come back from this very, very quickly once we get past this initial stage. And as Kyle said, we have to keep the structure of the economy in place, and getting $2 trillion out there in people's hands, all the things the Federal Reserve is doing right now to backstop the financial system, all those things are helping us keep the structure together so that we can come back quickly. The other thing I would say, as far as specifically for our area, and this is very, very important, there's been a complete revolution in the oil and gas industry in the past few years. We've gone from running out to having an abundance. We've gone from being a net importer to a net exporter. I mean, all kinds of things have changed. When we get through this, all those, this was not a structural problem in the economy. This is a health problem. That structure comes back. The world's demand for energy comes back, and we have the resources to supply it to the world. And none of that has changed. It's been put on a massive pause button with a lot of pain here for a few months, but nothing has changed fundamentally about the economy. So we come out of this, and all the good things that were going on with the oil and gas industry in the past come right back into place. So there's a lot to. This is a tough situation, hurting a lot of people, and we all need to pull together and do what we can to help everybody else get through it. But at the end of the day, we come out of it with those same underlying strengths and phenomena and transitions we've gone through are still in place. And this place is going to supply energy to the world for the next century and beyond.
Absolutely, and perhaps learning a few lessons from this too. Gentlemen, I appreciate all of you taking the time, offering your perspective on something that impacts all of us and we all have our eyes on right now. Take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and thank you again for making time for us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tatum.
Now we must end this show on a bright spot. We've been talking and asking you to send us the love. We want to know how you've been spending your days to make them a little brighter. Take a look at this. Megan set up a bear hunt for her neighborhood kids. If you can read the signs, they say, "Bear with me, I'm a gorilla and we aren't bears, but you can seal include us." That's cute. And what are you doing? We want to know what you're doing to make your days a little brighter. Text us your videos, photos. Our number is 567-9991. And we have 2 more parts to our special, Caring Through COVID, a week of empowerment. On Wednesday, we are exploring how you can take care of your physical and mental health. And then Friday, we will focus on perhaps the biggest impact the pandemic has had on our economy thus far. That's happening right here on NewsWest 9 from 6:30 to 7. We are speaking with several community leaders and experts to answer your questions. We're so excited about all of this, so be sure to stay tuned all week. For now, that's all the time we have for you. We will see you at 10. Take care.